Thanks a lot for taking the time to be here today. It's amazing to get this many distinguished people in a room together. So, and I know we're packed in tight, so we'll try to keep everything very efficient today. What I'd like to talk about this morning a little bit is no pitches on technology or anything like that, but more of some thoughts at a high level on cybersecurity. Got a few slides to work with here as eye candy. I know it's hard because we don't have a big screen up here, but if there's anything in particular that I think is important on those slides, I'll let you know. Maybe you can swivel around and take a look at that. But the talk I was going to give this morning, or discussion to have, is the title was The Inevitable Decline of the Digital Age, with inevitable in parens. And I've talked about this before with folks because I think there's a presumption or an assumption that the productivity that we all enjoy in the digital age is just going to continue. And I'm not sure that's actually the case. I'm an optimist, so I'd like to think that's going to work out, right? But I'm not sure that's actually the case. And I think there's absolutely a chance that if certain things aren't done differently over the course of, call it, the next 10 to 20 years, not over the next year or two, that it's possible that we may see a decline in the digital age instead of what we've always seen, which is an increase in that, right? So starting off with the fact that we are in the digital age in the first place, it's a fairly obvious statement. But when I'm speaking with members of boards of directors or senior government officials or academics, I like to start off at that point, which is we live in the digital age. Everything we're doing today from a personal perspective, from a corporate perspective, is based on digital technology. You only have to think about things that didn't exist not too long ago and things that will exist into the future. I don't know if anybody's had a chance to do like virtual reality demos yet. Anybody had a chance to do Oculus and things? I can tell you, like 3 years from today, everything's changed. All right, you checked one of those things out. But the point of that is that we absolutely live today in the digital age, and very importantly, so much so that the age we're living in now has really been sort of called the fourth industrial revolution. This is a term that was used over in Davos. I was over in January, and I thought it was kind of interesting. If anybody's been over to Davos, it's usually a forum for all sorts of very important issues, more societal than anything else. This year it was all technology, right? All technology all the time, talking about the fourth industrial revolution. And what they meant by that was the technology-backed revolution that is dramatically changing the world, and it has to continue, right? As an imperative, it has to continue. And the point for that, and the reason people were talking like that at such senior levels, was that if you look back at other revolutions where the term industrial revolution has been used, 3 in our history, right, of mankind, and the amount of time that it took for those revolutions to have impact on the productivity of the world, they were measured in hundreds of years, right? There's been more productivity gained from the digital age in the last 50 years than all 3 industrial revolutions combined before it. Right? So the compression is super important. Even more importantly is the fact that it has to continue. Right? When you look at the demographics of the world, population growth, all sorts of just statistics like that, right? It has to continue. So we have to make sure that we keep going. But the topic that was being discussed there, and more in senior circles, is will it happen? Will it continue along those lines, right? And the point of that is that as we continue to see more and more breaches occur. And I know right now there's media exhaustion on this, right? So we don't read about these as much as we used to in the last year or two, but they're on the rise, not on the decline. We all know that if you're a practitioner. That as we see more and more of these breaches occur, the real problem for us is not so much whether we're going to see digital Pearl Harbor or not. That could happen, of course. That would be a very bad day. It's what happens when the trust just bleeds out of the system, right? And people just don't trust it anymore. If they don't trust using the digital technology and they stop using it, or all they have to do is slowly start to use less of it, we would see GDP declines, or declines in velocity of GDP growth, that would be devastating to the future for all countries and as we look forward, right? And this is the topic that's actually being talked about more so than digital Pearl Harbor, is just the slow bleed out of trust in the system. So we like to talk about security all the time, right? I like to talk about the trust. I mean, security leads to the trust that just hopefully is implicit and that people don't think about in the system. And I don't have to get too deep into this to make you understand that, right? If we said today from a financial perspective or banking perspective, there's actually no such thing as money anymore. There hasn't been money for a very long time, right? Money is a concept now. It's just bits and bytes. So if I ask everybody here to say, hey, take out your smartphone, which didn't exist 10 years ago, but take out your smartphone and everybody check out what their bank account is, their balance, and we all checked and we all had $1,000 in our bank account, right? And then 10 minutes later I said, let's do it again. And you took it out and it said you had $20. The meeting would be over, right? Everybody would leave, and I'm not sure what you do, but first you try to figure what the hell's going on, right? More likely than not, we'd all be running to ATM machines, trying to actually put our hands on something physical that actually doesn't exist anyway, but trying to put our hands on something physical, and we would literally have a run on the banks, right? Now, importantly, in that scenario I just gave you, which is actually not hard to imagine, in that scenario I gave you, it would not matter whether the money was actually gone or not. All it would matter is the perception that it was gone, right? So even further blurring of reality and perception in the digital age, and how easy it is, and it's starting to be this case, that you can just bleed trust out of the system. The DOC put out a report back in February I thought was pretty interesting out of NTIA, specifically on this topic, showing or noting that there has been a decline in usage in banking systems and healthcare systems, online capabilities around that, specifically because of this issue, right? So it's not just hypothetical in nature. So the more of this kind of stuff that we see on breaches and attacks, successful attacks, the more concerning it becomes of the future of what's going to happen for the digital age. So this is incredibly important stuff on a global basis, not just the United States, on a global basis, and why it's being talked about in terms of industrial revolutions and what do we have to do as a society to overcome these lack of trust issues or growing lack of trust issues. And that's why we see so much attention at the top on this, right? That's why we see President Obama pictured here last year out in Silicon Valley hosting the first ever presidential summit, not in Washington, D.C., right, but on privacy and security, because the intersection of privacy and security goes to trust in the digital age, right? We've seen our militaries spin up U.S. Cyber Command, right, so a air, land, sea, and now cyber theaters of war as well. That's not specific to the United States by any regard, but this is on a global basis. And while we see boardrooms globally having one of the top 3 issues always being discussed at every board meeting from a enterprise risk management perspective being cybersecurity or cyber or security. There's lots of studies out now showing that over 60% of publicly traded companies in the United States today have standing committees at the board level now for security, usually called safety and security or cybersecurity or security. That's pretty unusual because there's always been the audit committee, the compensation committee, and nominating governance committee, and now there's a security committee, right? Just to give some sense of how important this is to corporations as well, because they know their entire reputation is on the line, and as we've seen with some of these breaches, reputation can lead to massive business loss, if not closing down the business completely. So these are not hypothetical situations, right? Now, there's lots of technologies in the world, lots of macro technology evolution in the world, right? And I think one mistake that we've made as a society is to think that security is one of them, right? When we talk about security a lot, we tend to talk about technology, and we try to think of it as technology. And absolutely, there's a lot of technology that goes into security, right? But security has far exceeded that now. It's more of a concept that is pervasive in nature and that rises well above technology. And I think you can see this, some of my examples here. There are no presidential commissions that I'm aware of or summits on cloud computing. We don't have in the United States military people running around with patches on their sleeves in the mobility commands, right, like they do from a cyber perspective. And I'm not aware of any standing board committees in any boardrooms in the United States on cloud computing or SDN or NFV or anything along those lines. But that is true in every case for security, and that's because security is really become pervasive for us. And the flip side of all this digital productivity that I've talked about is exactly the problem. The flip side is the bad guys using the digital capabilities themselves, right, to take advantage of the inherent weaknesses in this. And this tectonic storm has been going on for a couple decades now and is really picking up steam because we have lots of macro technology trends like cloud, like mobility, like SaaS, like IoT coming down the path for not too distant future. And all of these generate great productivity enhancements. And for that reason, they will occur. Right? There's no stopping them from a security perspective to say, hey, we're not doing IoT and secure, right? That's not going to happen. These will absolutely occur as we've seen them occur in the past. So security has to figure it out. But these are the exact avenues that the bad guys are going to use, right, to turn the digital productivity right on its head to their advantage. And because of that, this idea of security is getting more and more complicated. We didn't think it'd be hard enough today, right? Just picture what's coming in a not too distant future, right? We have the absolute blending of physical and cyber, right? For those who are using industry parlance, we've been talking about IT systems for a very long time and data integrity in IT systems, as we should be. One of the most interesting topics, I think, right now that we're going to turn our attention to is IT to OT, right? SCADA systems, ICT systems, where it's definitely a reality that these IT systems we've been trying to protect for a long time are the gateway into the operational technologies for things like the energy sector, for airlines, for dams, for electric utilities. When Tony was just here a minute ago saying, hey, we've got a lot of legacy systems that really need upgrade and protecting, he was actually talking about IT stuff, right? When you start looking at some of the things I'm talking about, waterworks and utilities and energy, and how archaic those systems are and controlled by these legacy IT systems, the world gets to be a pretty scary place. Right? We did see not too long ago, back when the government indicted some folks in New York for attacking the financial services system for DDoS attacks, that along with that, we did see somebody in there as well for being claimed to have trying to take over a small dam in upstate New York, right? And actually demonstrating that capability. So you can imagine the downstream consequences when physical infrastructure is starting to be compromised by IT systems, right? My prediction is this concept of ICT, SCADA, IT to OT, this will dominate the cybersecurity conversation in about 3 years' time. The second major thing that's coming along that makes our jobs all harder is we're massively aggregating all the data, right? It's a good idea to do that from a cloud perspective. It's going to happen because the ROIs seemingly are pretty high about that. But that's also like saying, if you're on the other side of this equation, the bad guy equation, thank you very much. Right? Appreciate you putting that all together for me in one place, right? So the aggregation is going to create its own challenges as well. And then on top of that, having IoT come along and say, thank you for putting everything together in one place for me, I appreciate it, and thanks for giving me 10 million more ways to get at it that you have to protect and I don't have to, right? And then the third part of this is, for all intent and purposes today, this is a bit of an exaggeration, but compute power is limitless, right? It's been driving in that direction for quite some time. And there's really no reason for us to imagine that it's not going to keep going that direction into the future. And because compute power is, in essence, limitless, there's advantages to that, obviously, for productivity and all the things we talked about. But from the attacker perspective, they usually get to drive more of the advantages than we do around that, right? So as long as the cost of compute power is declining, and we should just assume that's going to happen forever, usually the advantage goes to the attacker on that, and the defender takes a long time to catch up on that, if ever, right? So for all these reasons, I think that security has become more of a fabric. That's a word I've been using. It's more of a fabric item than a technology item, and it's woven through all decisions today from a technical perspective, and even more so, more and more from a policy perspective as well. It's really hard to imagine a major technical decision or IT decision being made in an organization or an enterprise where security is not being talked about. Like, somebody's going to say, how do we secure that, right? And even if it has nothing to do with security, it could just be storage related or something along those lines, but security is absolutely discussed today. So it's become a fabric item woven through all these decisions, and because of that, it's going to be around for a very long time. Sometimes I get asked a question, either in my capacity as running Palo Alto Networks or as the chairman of the president's NSTAC, how long are we going to talk about the cyber thing? Like, a long time, right? And I am an optimist on this. I actually believe that we are going to figure things out here from a cyber perspective. But what I mean by that is that in, a couple decades time from today, when we figure it out, what that really means is that we've figured out how to work the risk into our lives, because it's not going away, right? There are many risks that we've figured that out for, whether it be chemical, nuclear, biological, all sorts of macro-related issues that go to our very way of life. And over a long period of time, we figured out how to compartmentalize those risks in such a way that we get on with our lives, and we don't have they don't have meetings about nuclear or space-based attacks all the time. Could they happen this afternoon? Absolutely, right? Are we teaching our kids duck and roll anymore? No, right? Same with cybersecurity. We're living in an age where it's sort of like a 1959 analogy to Sputnik right now. But I do believe that over time we will compartmentalize cyber into some acceptable risk that will be with us always, but be something we can get on with, with our lives. But the answer to the question about how long we're going to talk about cyber is long after all, we're all retired, right? Probably. So this is going to be with us for a long period of time. So when you have something like that, something so important that goes to the very way of life, not only for the United States, but globally for developed and developing nations, for GDP growth, how you think about it really matters. So I have this concept of look, ideas really matter because our philosophy really matters. It's probably a truism that if you don't know where you're trying to go, the chances of getting there are minimal, right? So where are we trying to go, and what ideas are really going to matter for us as we think about cyber into the future? And really just starting with this one basic concept here, and this is where the picture may be interesting, was, we have to restore trust in the system, right? We have to maintain it, we have to restore it. So this simple sort of math imbalance I showed you here, which is as long as the cost of a successful attack continues to decline over time, the number of successful attacks will continue to increase over time. I didn't say attacks, I said successful attacks, right? The number of attacks that we're seeing today and that we're going to see in the future will go up. I will not stop that for you, and you will not stop that. They will go up, right? Always. So the trick is thinking about successful attacks versus just attacks, right? So how is it that we change this math imbalance here, which is as long as the cost of a successful attack is low, the number of successful attacks will be high, right? So how do we take this and flip it on its head as a matter of economics, right? And try to drive towards substantially increasing the cost of a successful attack. Because if we can substantially increase the cost of a successful attack, economic theory would hold the number of them should go down. I didn't say they're going to go away, I said they're going to go down, right? So how do we change the economics here? Because today the economics vastly favor the attacker as opposed to the defender for fairly obvious reasons. So that's what we have to do, right? So this is a math equation, it's a math battle. So in that kind of math battle or equation, I think the operative word that we use a lot, I use a lot, is leverage. When you have a math imbalance like that, you want leverage, right? And we don't have a lot today. So how do we get increasing leverage over time? I think three things are important to do that. The first is technology. And from a technology perspective, I'll talk a little bit more about this in a second, that technology perspective I think has to be prevention-oriented, not prevention-capable, prevention-oriented, right? Which is how do we work harder and harder and harder to stop as many attacks as possible before they're successful, because if you do that, you'll drive the cost of successful attacks up. The second thing is threat sharing. We talk about that constantly. I mean, us collectively talk about that. I want to touch on that in just a second with maybe a finer definition of what that should actually mean. And then the third is education. Now, everybody has noted in the past, and will be the case in the future, that you can have the best technology in the world, and you can share all the threats, and people are still going to do stupid things. Right, so education is critical and be with us. I really want to spend most of my time in the first two of these, right, because these are actionable items for us. So from a prevention technology orientation, I think we have to understand what the current paradigm looks like today in almost all networks around the world, right? And that's this is where the picture might be interesting too, right? The current paradigm today looks like this, and it's been like this for 25 or 30 years, which is legacy technologies usually delivered in point solutions that are designed to do one thing, and almost always designed with detection in mind. Now, I'm not saying these are bad things. I'm just saying this is the state of the art for a very long time, right? When you have legacy technologies delivered in point solutions that are primarily about detection, we increasingly end up in where we are today, which is a reactive, manually intensive world. Okay? Now, if we're right about the math problem, about the cost of compute power going down constantly, and that favoring the attacker because they get to use that for highly automated attacks, cheaper and cheaper automated attacks, and our world looks increasingly reactive and manual, we are already dead. It's just a matter of time. That's a math problem. So if this is what we keep doing, it's a mathematical certainty that the ship will sink. Right? It's just going to take some time. So what do we have to do? We have to get to a different paradigm. And a paradigm has to be one where we're relying more and more on next generation technologies that are increasingly delivered in real platforms. I'll talk about what that means in a minute. In real platforms that have a prevention orientation to them. They're trying to be prevented. Again, there'll be no such thing as 100% prevention, but trying to be prevented, because if you're not trying, you won't. And as a result of that, we hopefully get to a position where we could be more proactive and automated in nature, right? So the word automated is absolutely important here, that if we're fighting a highly automated adversary, we should try to be as automated as possible, right? That mathematically is the only way to survive. I'm not saying get ahead, survive, right? On trust in the digital age. So this is the paradigm shift that is happening today and has to continue to occur into the future. So I think it's important to talk a little bit about the aspects of this for a second. So what is a real platform here? All right. First, there's lots of things in security. It's a very, very broad area. So the first thing is understanding what you're actually capable of and doing it in a real platform that has been designed from the ground up to actually be prevention oriented and try to interdict attacks everywhere the attack has to do something right. This is a very common theory that's been in security for a long time about the kill chain or life cycle. But the way that that's been gone about for a very long time is to say, let me give you a point product to do one thing where the attack has to do one thing right? And then you get to put them all in your networks and integrate them on the back end, right? To try to make them work together, right? So a real platform wouldn't do that. A real platform would have those capabilities be native into the platform. I mean, they're all built from the ground up to actually work together and be automated with each other. So if one of the capabilities does something right, the rest of them were automatically reprogrammed with whatever that new knowledge is. The second thing a real platform would be extensible in nature, because threats move constantly. Data is moving all over the place all the time. So a real platform would be able to move very quickly with threats and data as they move around without requiring a new platform every single time that a new threat exists or a new form of attack exists or your data moves somewhere else in the universe, right? And then the third is you get leverage from a real platform, which means that if the platform did something right for one member of the ecosystem, ideally in a highly automated fashion, everybody in the ecosystem would benefit from that automatically, right? So the word automation here is very critical as we think through what real platforms would do. The second thing is, from a platform perspective, is we have to stop thinking about primarily about topography, right? And start thinking more and more about data. Where's the data? Where's it going? Where is it now? Where is it moving around? So consistency of this definition of security, of prevention-oriented security delivered from a real platform, has to be entirely consistent. All right, so think about the data. What I mean by that is when the platform's doing something for you, it has to do, or you'd want it to do, exactly the same thing where data's on your endpoint, it's in your perimeter, it's in your data center, it is in AWS, it's in NSX, it's in Dropbox, it doesn't really matter, right? It makes really no sense, logical sense, to say that I will have different security at different points where my data is, or I will be limited in how I will deploy my infrastructure by security because I can't have the exact same level of security at different places. So consistency absolutely matters just as much as leverage matters as well. So the first point I mentioned was technology that's prevention oriented. The second point I mentioned to get leverage is threat sharing. I wanted to talk about this specifically but quickly for just a second because everybody is involved in threat sharing initiatives. They're good. ISACs, ISALs, whatever the case may be, right? It's good to share threat information. However, I would argue that if these 3 points, and this is where it might be worth looking at, but if these 3 objectives are not the objective of the threat sharing consortium or initiative you're involved in, it's not really working right yet. You don't have enough leverage yet. So those 3 things would be, can you share in a highly automated fashion all known threats so that in an automatic way, all the systems understand known threats? The second thing is, can you automatically or very quickly take an unknown threat and turn it into a known threat? And then the third thing is, when you do that, can you automatically share that now known threat in a highly automated fashion, and everything's reprogrammed automatically, right? So I would argue these are the 3 objectives for all threat sharing initiatives, or should be, because if you can get these things done, then you actually have leverage by taking human beings out of the equation, because we're fighting very highly automated adversaries. So that's the second thing I would argue there. Now I wanted to just quickly address one thing. This is definitely not a Palo Alto Networks commercial because there's 0 commercial benefit from this for us, but we founded a little while ago, 2 years ago, something called the Cyber Threat Alliance with this threat sharing mantra in mind, and along with Symantec, Fortinet, and McAfee, and now other security companies as well. And what is the Cyber Threat Alliance doing? It's really trying to drive to exactly those 3 goals in threat sharing, right? Interestingly to me, when I was running VeriSign before I run Palo Alto Networks, that I found that all verticals in the world were actually sharing threat information with each other. They decided that cybersecurity, like it is here in Washington, D.C., is a nonpartisan issue, right? And that it's better for everybody to share, and it'll compete in other ways. So the banking industry does that, the healthcare industry does that, the retail industry does that, education does that, the government does that, somewhat, right? But everybody's decided to share. It's a good idea. The only people who've not shared anything with each other is the security industry, right? Which is a little perverse, right? Because the security industry, at least the major players, if they actually got together and shared what they knew from a compromise, indicators of compromise or threat perspective, collectively pretty much know everything there is to know, right? Particularly if it's on a global basis, right? But they didn't do that, haven't done that. And the reason for that is competitive, because the security industry likes to come to you and say, buy my stuff because I see things that the next security vendor doesn't see. And the next security vendor will say, buy my stuff because I see stuff that that security vendor doesn't see. And in some cases, you're actually right, because you might see things based on niches, you might see things based on endpoints versus networks or geographies or things along those way. And you're in a position, or enterprise is in a position of buying everything, right? Because you're trying to put this threat puzzle together. And I think that's an archaic idea. And the security industry has to evolve very quickly to the point of, instead of competing on what we know, we need to compete on what we do with what we know, right? So back to the ideas of having platforms that it can ingest information in a highly automated way as fast as possible and propagate it automatically as fast as possible. So that's what the Cyber Threat Alliance is doing, not just in name only. Like I said, we started about 2 years ago. We stood up servers using Stix and Taxi, and every day of the week, multiple tens of thousands of indicators of compromise are being shared by these companies, and then what they do with it's up to them. If they can actually get it into their products and make their products better, they're doing it. We're definitely doing that at Palo Alto Networks, but the idea is to get that universe as big as possible in a highly automated fashion. Okay, and let me just give you a few quick examples of some of this highly automated capabilities in action, right? So a few use cases, we could talk more about these later on. But here, here's an example of one DoD agency that was looking for the capability to actually understand at a granular level, applications, contents, and users, right? And had like everybody else, running legacy systems, but over the course of the last few years, has moved into a prevention-oriented mode, adopted next-generation platform technology, so that they can really have a high degree of confidence in all the applications that run across your network, who's using them for what purposes at what time, and try to be automated in nature on taking care of threats. Another example up here is another government agency that also took the leap on trying to move into the next generation as well. And I wanted to note this one because this little graph up here is their graph, not ours. And it actually shows the number of threats coming across the system by their measurements that were blocked, right? And as you can see where the green line, when they adopted this next-gen platform, went through the roof, the assumption was that they were actually under attack. That wasn't the case at all. The case was they didn't see any of this stuff before, right? Let alone block it, right? So just the ability to have visibility in the first place across these, the landscape became increasingly important, right? Another example here, back to the ICT SCADA in the Navy, is the idea of ships, in this case aircraft carriers, have an enormous amount of SCADA environment on them that are communicating using IT networks back to other ships, back to shore, and even computers on the ships themselves, right? So being able to parse those things together so you have the capabilities IT to OT. And I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip this last one. And the last thing I want to mention is, I said prevention-oriented technology, threat sharing, and education, right? So again, you can have the best education or the best technology in the world, share everything, and then people will continue to practice bad cyber hygiene. I think it's the responsibility of everybody who's in a position of authority. It could be you as a parent, it could be as an employer with your employees, it could be the government with citizens, to constantly work on cyber hygiene so that people will understand that they actually have some responsibility to protect themselves. Right? I think that just goes unsaid too many times, and people don't realize that the bad guys definitely are going to try to take your information, and particularly in a generational way. Younger folks today, my kids for sure, would gladly give you my social security number for a free movie. They don't really understand the value of their own information, and let alone how to protect themselves in that. So continue to work on things along those lines. The picture up here is a permanent exhibit that we're sponsoring at the San Jose Tech Museum. It's much larger than this room. It's designed for teaching kids ages 7 to 19, so you can imagine the challenge on that of cybersecurity, the basics of cryptography to get them interested in the space, but most importantly, that people will definitely try to take their information from them, and what can they do to protect themselves from that and learn that at an early age and their own responsibilities. So I know that was very fast. I appreciate you giving me a little bit of your time. Congressman is here, so I would like to turn it over to him. But thanks a lot for being here with us today. I hope you find the rest of the day enjoyable. Take care.